Thank you, Jim, and good morning to this group. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. I was thinking about this occasion and happened to have been in the first seminar of this type that was ever held. That was 1967. I think there's some way to see this. I saw it on the screen earlier, but this is the original picture. Quite a relic, I'll tell you that. You'll see there are 12 people on there. We were a smaller company then, so there were a dozen of us, a dirty dozen. They called us the 12 disciples and a lot of other things, but as a matter of fact, what happens in this group, and it happened in this first group, is we got to be sort of friends during this period of time, and we stayed close together. It was interesting to see what happened to this group over a period of years, and I can tell you that for the most part, they were very successful. There were a couple of black sheep that didn't quite make it, but for the most part, it worked out well. I think you'll find as you spend this week together, you're going to make friends here. That's kind of one of the side benefits of spending this time together, because you're going to be around for a long time. You're going to be important in this company, and it's great to have a network of friends that came together in such a special way as you did here. Well, Paul Donahue asked me to spend a few minutes with you this morning to talk about GPC's culture. I probably brought this upon myself in a conversation with Paul. You know, Wilton Looney, you've probably heard his name. Some of you may have even met him over a period of time. Wilton had just passed away in June, so I had culture on my mind because we lost an icon and one of the great builders of the culture of this company. I was sad about it, and I mentioned to Paul that when this happens, we lose leaders like that, we lose something, and we've got to be very cautious and very alert to continue this culture. As good leaders and important leaders pass away, we have to pick up the mantle and go forward. Wilton was an icon, and you know, he died at age 99, had a wonderful life, but he was still engaged with this company, I can tell you, right up until the day he died. He was interested, asking questions. Paul can tell you the phone calls would come, and he was just a wonderful leader and so important to our company. He came to work for the company at age 19. He was hired in 1938 by Mr. Fraser, who was the founder of the company. And he became president in 1955 and then CEO in 1961 at age 42. That's when Mr. Fraser passed away, and it fell to Wilton, because Mr. Fraser had been such a strong leader, and Wilton had been working with him a period of time, but not long enough in Wilton's mind, so it came to him too soon. But I can tell you he picked it up. Now, Wilton retired in 1990, which means he was CEO for 29 years, which is unheard of in this day and time. Sorry about that, Paul, if Paul's still here, but you're not going to be 29. But anyway, he was with us for a long time as a key leader, and as I said before, we risk diminishing or losing parts of our culture when this kind of thing happens, so it's your responsibility here today, and people like you around our company that are younger in leadership roles that are going to get more important over time, to embrace this culture and build it and be certain that it stays in place. I noticed that many of you joined Genuine Parts Company through a merger and acquisition activity over time, and you had your own culture. And hopefully you still have your culture, and it blends right in with Genuine Parts Company. And you can have really a hybrid culture in your own case. I can tell you that as we are working on M&A activity, culture becomes a very important issue. because you can see up front that if your culture is similar, you have a good start in having a successful combination of companies. And many times the company that we're talking with has that same feeling. They say, well, what is this Genuine Parts Company culture? How does it fit us? What's it going to be to our people? What's it going to mean down the road? So it's an important factor in the whole thing. I'd like to dwell for just a moment. Some of this is history. I hope you don't mind a little history, because history is the builder of culture. I'd like to talk to you just a moment about how fortunate we were that Mr. Fraser, our founder, was the splendid person that he really was, and that he in turn recognized the quality and uniqueness of Wilton Looney, his successor. These two gave us our culture and developed it with such a continuity over the years, continuity that you don't see very often in corporate activities. Mr. Fraser was CEO from our founding in 1928 all the way to 1961, which was 33 years. Then Wilton's tenure for 29 years, which we talked about just a little earlier, means that these two powerful and caring people were in charge of this company for 62 years in combination. Two people, 62 years. It's an incredible story. Our culture is their gift to us. They gave it to us. When Mr. Fraser was just a young man, he was 34 years old when he boarded the train in Wheeling, West Virginia, where he was a partner in a little parts store there. He and his partner heard about the store in Atlanta, Georgia. He got on the train and rode down and bought one store in Atlanta, Georgia, which then became Genuine Parts Company. Now, Mr. Fraser was born in Pennsylvania. His father was a Presbyterian minister, so he had his values in place. And he was a good man, really good man, and as it turns out, a very brilliant man. Friendly, good feel for people. He knew how to pick the right people, that little small team that he started to build right from the beginning. And he built a company, and I don't think he could have had any way to know, of course, what was going to happen to his company over time, and passing away in 1961. But as you probably know, it's become quite a story. This annual report, you probably look at it during this meeting. I don't know of any other company that puts their whole history right on every year. It's in this publication. It's on the front, the back, in here, somewhere, all the way from the beginning of our history. And, you know, I've often thought the only year we ever lost money was the first year. We lost about $2,500. We had sales of $75,000. And I often thought, well, Mr. Fraser, if you had known that this was the only year the company was ever going to lose money, you would have found a way probably to make $2,500 up somewhere. But I'll tell you what, when you look at it, it's with pride, and you see that a record like that is just hard to match, a very proud record. Mr. Fraser had great judgment to hire Wilton and develop him, and we were very fortunate about that. Wilton was just a young man. He was from a rural community in Georgia. I don't think they even show up on the map anymore, a place called Vanna, Georgia. And Mr. Fraser hired him at age 19, and his first assignment was in Charlotte, North Carolina, at a store we had there. So he just sent him right over to Charlotte, started to work in that store. And maybe a couple of years after he started, World War II came along. And Wilton was invited to join the U.S. Army through the draft. So he was going to be gone for a while. He thought a year. Everybody said it'll be a year. Mr. Fraser said, Wilton, this is going to be more than a year. It's going to be a while. So you take this opportunity to learn everything you can, take every course you can, learn from the people around you. This will be a learning opportunity for you. And so Wilton did that. He went in as an enlisted man, the lowest rank, enlisted rank. But during his training days, his early days in the Army, someone told him about OCS, which he had never even heard of. But he got into OCS and became an officer before he shipped out to his eventual assignment. And when he mustered out at age 26, he was a major. So he had really taken Mr. Fraser's advice and absorbed every possible thing that he could. He told me one time that he actually grew up in the Army. Now, they sent him to Burma. And Burma, they were building a road at the time. It's called the Burma Road. And it was reaching from Burma all the way through the jungle up to China to ship supplies for the Chinese and for the war effort. So his job was maintenance of the vehicles and maintenance of the road to keep those supplies moving up to China. He was there 3 years in the jungle. He refused to take a leave for 3 years. People were getting leaves, and they were probably going to Australia or somewhere for a nice break, and he refused to do it. His theory was that the harder they worked and the longer they stayed with it, the quicker it'd get done and the quicker he'd get home. That was just the way he thought. So he diligently worked there in the jungle for about 3 years. Well, Mr. Fraser did teach Wilton well, and 23 years later, in 1961, after he was hired, he was made president of the company. Now, Mr. Fraser called Wilton and Wilton's wife, Martha, to Atlanta to break this news to him. So they were in Atlanta. Wilton told me this story. He said that he had visited with Mr. Fraser that day, and Mr. Fraser had finally said, well, okay, now, Wilton, you're going to run the company. I want to know what you're doing, but I don't want to know all the details. You run the company. But you just remember that I'm still CEO. Wilton said, yes, sir. I'll remember that. Well, he got home that evening, was talking to Martha, and he said, Martha, here's what he told me. But he said, I really don't know what a CEO does. And she said, well, if I were you, I'd find out before I went to work in the morning. So anyway, I'll talk about myself just a moment because it ties in with culture, because I had the good fortune to be hired by Genuine Parts Company in its Memphis operation in 1958. Well, June of 58 happens to be a little over 60 years ago, which is hard to believe. It was a summer job. I walked in off the street to apply, and I'd have to say that was a really lucky day for me, because I was not there long when I decided I was going to stay somehow. We were a small company we did about $57 million in total revenue that year. And most of our operations were in the southern part of the United States. $57 million in revenue, but I had a feeling it was going to get bigger. You could just sense it. Frankly, I had never encountered a group like the group in that Memphis operation. I'd never seen people like that, work together that way. All that went on just was so favorable. Well, it was the culture. It was already developed and it was there. And the culture, without even being aware of what a culture was, it attracted me. So culture played a very important role in my life, the Genuine Parts Company culture, because it brought me there and kept me there. Now, this may sound a bit strange to you, but from my early days, I really did not think of Genuine Parts Company as just a business or a corporate entity. It's more like a living thing to me, a great spirit, with spirit being the key word. So with this in mind, what are some of the characteristics of GPC's culture as we think of the word spirit? We'll just look at a few key pieces of the culture. First, I would say we have a generous spirit, a generous spirit. We have a time in this meeting, I think, following my remarks, that we talk about giving back to the community and having a heart in the community, which we do, and it goes all the way back to Mr. Fraser. We give our time and we give our money. Mr. Fraser didn't have much money in the early days. He was investing back into this little growing company, and he didn't have a lot of money. He gave what he could in the community, but he gave his time as well. He headed what I guess I call the Community Fund, which was preceded United Way. And he was active in a lot of charitable activities in Atlanta. He set the tone. And not only is it in the community, but with employees and with our customers. You know, we have natural disasters. We have families that get in trouble for one reason or another with health issues or whatnot. And we have the spirit that brings us to that and to help our people through those kinds of times. We've got to keep that and be sure it stays in place. We have an open and inclusive spirit. We should always demonstrate a candidness and a willingness to share information at all levels in the company. This seminar is a perfect example. You're here, leaders are spending their time with you, sharing information, answering your questions in a very open and candid way. That's just the way we should conduct our business. And you know, when you get back home, you should share this information with your people, with your team back home. They'll be interested in what happened in this big week you spent in Atlanta. It's a way to share in the culture, a way to follow the culture. Go back home and tell them what happened here. Thinking a moment of inclusive spirit, I must tell you that Genuine Parts Company has always seemed like a family to me. The people that are part of GPC have been friends of mine, as well as their families. Somehow it makes a job more fun when this happens. In my own family, especially my spouse, Sandra, has always felt a part of what's going on at Genuine Parts Company. Her input, sometimes unsolicited, has helped me make better decisions as I went along. I can tell you that for sure. This kind of atmosphere is unique. In today's fast pace, it may be difficult to keep up, but remember that family spirit. Make it an inclusive thing. A spirit of correctness. By this, I mean striving to do things right and with impeccable ethics. This applies to our relationship with all constituencies, employees, customers, suppliers, and in our community. This even includes our competitors. And here's another quick old story. Back in the 60s and early 70s, we were under investigation by the FTC. They felt, and the political tone at that time was, our business has gotten too large, and they didn't want large business. And we were just a regional distributor of auto parts. And that's how extreme the attitude was in our government at that time. So for years, we were under this investigation. We went ahead. We couldn't make any more acquisitions at the time. We were in a dead period on that. And so we went along building our company internally while this investigation went on. Wilton himself took charge of that investigation because it was a threat to our company, and he kept total command of it. And over a period of time, we got a letter one day. Said this investigation has been discontinued. Doesn't mean we won't do it again, but it's discontinued. And they had made every effort in talking to all of our competitors across the country over a period of years about how advantageous our size was and how we must be throwing our weight around in the marketplace. They could not get one competitor to say one negative thing about Genuine Parts Company. It's because of our behavior and because of the way we operated and related with our competitors as well as everybody else. So, a spirit of discipline. From the beginning, I think we knew that a carefulness and discipline in our behavior was the right way to go, both in our personal behavior as well as the conduct of the company. Be aggressive, but do it in a measured way. Grow, but manage carefully, and protect your profits. Now, another quick story about Wilton. When he was CEO through the years, we were a much smaller company, very decentralized. And our headquarters was a small, lean operation. He had an absolute determination to never let headquarters get over 100 people. And he said, you know, we make very little money at headquarters. The profits and the work is done in the field, so we don't want a bureaucracy built up around headquarters. That was his feeling. He had a policy that if you wanted to add one person of any type to the payroll in headquarters, you had to get his approval to add that person. And I can promise you, you would rather do without that person than go talk with him. So, a spirit of discipline. I will add one more spirit, and it's an important one. One obvious element of our GPC culture is our competitive spirit. We strive to be the best at whatever we do. Each of you here today, I believe, has that competitive spirit, or you probably would not be here. You've worked harder and more successfully than others around you, and that's how you've arrived here. A healthy competitive spirit is a wonderful thing. We want to be the best personally, and we want GPC to be the absolute best. Well, I'm sure my time is up, and probably I'm on overtime. We have talked about several powerful spirits that drive our GPC culture. A generous spirit, an open and inclusive spirit, a spirit of correctness, a spirit of discipline, and a competitive spirit. Now, I'm sure that this list could go on. You could each add things to this list because it's a broad subject. I hope the little conversation we've had this morning will provoke you to think about this and embrace it. There are 39 of you here today. You're already leaders with even more responsibility probably ahead of you as you grow and advance. Put GPC's culture high on your list. You can make an impact. Believe me, our future really depends upon it. It's been a real treat to spend this time with you. And I wish each and every one of you a wonderful future and a good time in your years ahead with Genuine Parts Company. Thank you very much.
Mr. Prince?
Yes.
We've heard all week a lot of stories as it related to your predecessor. How did the news get broken to you that you would be following?
He actually invited Sandra and myself to a trip to Florida to see a customer and friends down there, and went along, and one afternoon we took off, and we were having a walk, just the two of us. And he told me at that time, just the two of us, he said, this is what we're going to do. And I'm telling you, it was a shock in a way, because I didn't expect it really, hadn't really thought about it, honestly. But he broke the news himself. And it was a little, you know, it was a it was a little bit of weight on my shoulders, but I looked around and realized what a powerful lineup of people we had and how it would work. And I knew he would still be very much involved and helpful in every way he could. So that's the way it happened, one-on-one. Yes.
I'm just interested in what you think the key characteristic of effective leadership is.
You know, I think in a way, effective leadership will put themselves at the bottom of the chain, and I mean they have to lead, and they have to be up front, and they have to have the ideas, and they have to urge others forward. But if you step back at the back and encourage your people ahead of you to do the job, they'll do the job. So I don't like the egotistical CEO who's always out front taking all the glory and the credit when he ought to be at the back, or she ought to be at the back pushing forward.
Hey Larry, can you talk a little bit about your time in Paris now that we're back in Europe?
Yeah, it was, you know, it was back during that period of time when we were sort of stymied in our growth because of the government. We were looking for other ways to grow the company because we didn't know if we were ever going to be able to buy any more parts businesses in the United States. Europe was one of those efforts, as was Motion Industries and SPR and other companies at that period of time. Well, Wilton asked me to go to Europe, and we didn't own anything. We just were going to look around, and so Sandra and I and my son, Larry Jr., moved over, and we started to look around. We wound up with some contacts and built a nice little company. It was small. And I can tell you that in reality, we were ahead of our time. If we'd have been, you know, the consolidation certainly hadn't started at that point. It was hard work to find anyone who wanted to sell their business. And if they did, it would not make economic sense. But we worked there and built a nice little company. We made money every year. We were in France and Switzerland and looked in other countries, but as I say, it was difficult. And then we had an offer to buy the company, an unsolicited offer from Dana Corporation to buy. They wanted distribution for their product. And so we sold and brought our money home. At that point in time, that was about 1976, and we were just acquiring Motion Industries in 1976. So we took what we could, brought it back home, and used it for investments back here. But as it turns out, you know, later on, this consolidation started a lot later. Some of the companies that we had are still very active over there and part of another company, another large company. But it was an interesting exercise. We learned a lot from the time we were there, and it was certainly broadening for my own experience, and I enjoyed the time there. We were treated nicely, living in Paris, France, for that 3.5 years. So that was a good experience. Any other questions? Thank you again. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mr.